I never thought that my life would become a courtroom play. Yet here we are. Daniel and I had been wed for 10 years. We created a lovely life over those years. One that was full of love, laughter, and a house we had worked so hard to earn. But there was always a dark cloud hovering in the background. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was that cloud. I could tell she didn't like me the instant I met her. She also didn't care to conceal it. She obviously felt that I wasn't suitable for her son. She would reply, "You're just after his money." In actuality, though, Daniel and I put a lot of effort into creating our life together. The money was never the main focus. The issue was that, as usual, Margaret wanted to dominate him. Margaret was a formidable force, possessing viciousness, cunning, and a commanding presence. She regarded Daniel as though he were a young child who needed her approval to exist. She only expressed affection when he fulfilled her every request. Despite his years of striving to win her love, she felt betrayed when he married me. He picked me over her. And she detested that. Daniel adored his mother in spite of everything. Although I never interfered with their relationship, I frequently found myself consoling him when she used harsh language. He desperately wanted her approval and to think she loved him in the proper way that a mother should. And then Daniel died 6 months ago. Daniel had been battling a lengthy illness, which gave us ample time to prepare, ensuring his death wasn't sudden. We discussed everything, even his will. He was aware that his mother would pursue me. He was aware of her state. And that leads us to today. With my hands firmly gripped together, I sat in the lawyer's office. My sorrow was still hot and new. Wearing a pricey black dress, Margaret sat across from me and attempted to mimic the distraught widow. Since Daniel's death, she hadn't communicated with me much. She sneered at me at the burial, telling me that I would soon be back on the streets, where I belonged. The lawyer confirmed what she believed she already knew, that she was going to inherit everything. And she sat there grinning. After clearing his throat, the attorney started reading Daniel's will. "I leave our house, our savings, and all of my personal belongings to my dear wife." Margaret regained her smirk quickly and leaned back in her chair with a cocky air. She obviously believed that she was entitled to the money, the stocks, the investments, and everything else. "I leave, Margaret, my mother," the attorney went on. After a moment, he took up another piece of paper. He seemed to be suppressing a smile as his lips quirked. "I have a personal message for you." Margaret's face changed instantly. Her cheeks flushed with barely held rage, and her smirk vanished completely. With a glance that might have scorched the paper, she snatched up the letter and unfurled it. With my heart racing, I leaned forward. "What is it saying?" Daniel wanted to make sure his final words to his mother were clear. The lawyer added, maintaining his composure. As Margaret grasped the letter and read it silently, I saw her hands shake and her knuckles turn white. She slammed the paper onto the desk after that. "This is a farce," she growled. Her anger and terror were both visible to me. Here, something had occurred. Daniel said what? I was surprised when the lawyer turned to me and gave me a copy of the letter. My eyes began to well up with pride instead of despair as I read. "Mother, you are most likely anticipating taking everything from my wife if you are reading this. You have never controlled me, and you will never control her. But I need you to realize that, throughout my life, you have attempted to control me and instill a sense of inadequacy. But knowing that I had created a life with someone who genuinely loved me, not for my money or what I could provide her, but for me, gave me comfort in my last hours. I owe you nothing because you never showed me that affection. My wife, who supported me when you didn't, deserves everything I own." There was silence in the room. Margaret's face took on a redness I had never seen before. Furious, she pushed the letter out of her path. "This is ridiculous," she spat. This was not what he meant. He was ill. He was unsure of his own words. The lawyer sighed, obviously anticipating this. "Mrs. Caldwell, I promise you that your son wrote this sanely and that you have nothing left under his intentions." Margaret's enraged face contorted. "You are to blame for this," she growled, gesturing to me with a quivering finger. "You poisoned him against me. He turned against his own mother because of you." At last, I spoke in a firm yet composed tone. "No, Margaret, you accomplished that on your own." She got up so quickly that the chair almost fell over. "This is not the end," she let out a scream. "I'll resist this. I'll bring you before the judge. I should own that house. I should have that money." Unfazed, the lawyer sat back in his chair. "Please challenge the will." But Daniel went above and beyond to make it unchangeable. "You would be wasting both your time and money." Margaret scowled at me and then at him. I could see the shock that she had lost, the astonishment in her eyes. She had lost the power she believed she possessed. She slammed the door behind her as she turned on her heel and ran out of the office. I sat there looking at the area she had just taken up for a long time. I then released a breath that I had been holding without realizing it. In the end, Daniel had resisted her. He had kept me safe even in death. However, I had a gut feeling that this was not the end of it. And I was correct. I hoped that everything would calm down a few days following the hearing. Margaret, however, wasn't going to give me much time to breathe. Her courage was truly remarkable. After Daniel's death, she had hardly been able to leave my life in peace. She relentlessly attacked me from every direction. It seemed like I was living under a microscope with her always observing me. And every move, every remark, and every action was planned to bring me down. I assumed the drama would end when the lawyer gave me the last documents securing the house and confirming Daniel's intentions. However, Margaret's journey was far from over. Margaret's journey was far from over. One afternoon, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to block out the tension and intense feelings that had been consuming me since Daniel's passing. The doorbell rang while I was, as usual, alone myself, trying to figure out what I was doing without him. After a brief moment of hesitation, I moved toward the door. Now, who would be visiting? The sight of her, Margaret, standing on the porch, possibly fresh from a corporate board meeting, sent my heart racing. It was ridiculous that she continued to hold herself with such assurance in spite of everything that had transpired. I got a chill from her icy smile as she gazed at me. With a mocking tone in her voice, she inquired casually, "Are you enjoying the house?" The anger I had been suppressing for weeks suddenly threatened to explode as I tightened my hands at my sides. With a steady voice but a racing mind, I said, "What do you want, Margaret?" I was worn out from everything we had already experienced together. She took a step forward, her eyes shining with a kind of twisted joy. And her smile grew. "You think you've won, don't you? That house, that money, it should have been mine. You were nothing before Daniel, and you'll be nothing again soon." Despite the lump in my throat, I forced myself to remain calm. Daniel made his choice. Margaret, you need to accept that. As if she had heard that a million times before. She sneered. "We'll see about that," she remarked in a venomous, frigid voice. "I'm not finished with you. You took my son from me. And now, I'm going to take everything from you." I stood there and kept her from seeing how hurtful what she had said was. I could feel the burden of the last several months bearing down on me. The ongoing anxiety, and the fear that Margaret would be able to break me to pieces. But at that moment, something inside of me exploded. I had been living in constant anxiety for weeks, constantly anticipating her next move. But now that I was staring at her, this lady who had been nothing but spiteful, cunning, and cruel, I no longer felt fearful. I moved closer to you. Stepping forward, I said, "Listen to me, Margaret," in a stern and unyielding voice. "You already lost. Daniel saw you for who you truly are. And no matter what you do, you will never win. This house is mine. My life is mine. And you," I thought to myself, "you have nothing. You did this to yourself." I noticed something in Margaret's eyes for the first time since I had known her. There was a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. There was a sudden surge of fear. She scoffed and turned on her heel, marching off into the night without saying anything. I saw her leave as I stood in the doorway. My stomach knot lessened a little, but I still had the uneasy feeling that this was far from finished. Margaret was never one to give up so quickly. And I was correct. The following morning, the phone rang. When I saw my lawyer's caller ID, I felt sick. I prepared myself. I suspected that his words would not be to my liking. He continued, "Margaret just filed another lawsuit." In a tense voice, "She's claiming Daniel had a secret will. One that leaves everything to her. It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. A secret will? That's ridiculous. Daniel didn't have one. I know, was his response. But she submitted paperwork. And worse, she has a witness. My heart stopped beating. Who? After a lengthy silence, he said a name that chilled my blood. David. He was Daniel's closest companion. He was a close friend from his childhood. The man who was Daniel's best man at our wedding had stood next to him. At Daniel's funeral, the man shed tears. With all my heart, I had trusted this man. And he was on Margaret's side now. It was nearly impossible to grasp the incredulity. The world seemed to be falling apart all around me. How could David have done this? How was this betrayal of Daniel possible? I had no hesitation at all. Fear, fury, and incredulity all fought for control as I took up the phone and called his number. He responded in a composed tone. Too quiet. David, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you're not helping her. He sighed after a lengthy moment of silence. Look, I don't want to be involved in this. But Margaret, she made some good points. She said Daniel changed his mind before he died. That he didn't want to leave you everything. My hands began to shake. And my eyesight became fuzzy. That's a lie. You know it's a lie. After a brief silence, he spoke again, but more quietly. She has a document, and I saw Daniel sign it. Everything around me whirled. I muttered, my voice trembling under the weight of the treachery. You're lying. She's paying you to lie. Isn't she? Quiet, I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. How much is she paying you? There was no response. I hung up, feeling more hurt than I had imagined from his deception. I was having trouble breathing. How could David, of all people, betray Daniel in this manner? He had spent his entire life being twisted and controlled by Margaret. How could he stand by her? I was unable to let this go. I needed to demonstrate the truth. I had to prove to everyone that David's betrayal and Margaret's lies were just that, lies. I went directly to my lawyer's office via car. Margaret had already filed a fresh will for him to review. As I walked in, he looked up, his expression solemn. He remarked, "This is a forgery." Right away, Daniel was meticulous. He would never have written a second will without going through me first. I let out a sigh of relief. But it was insufficient. So how do we prove it? He retrieved a file from his computer. Before Daniel passed, he made a video. He wanted to ensure that his wishes were unambiguous. I think now is the time to use it. A beat skipped in my chest. A film? Had Daniel produced a video? When he pressed play, Daniel appeared in front of the camera, looking worn down and gaunt but still the man I loved. He spoke in a firm, unflinching voice. Daniel started off with a strong and piercing voice. If you're watching this, it means my mother is trying to take what isn't hers. As I listened, I blinked back tears, with eyes that burned with a fierceness I had never seen before. Daniel went on, "Margaret, if you're sitting in a courtroom right now, trying to lie your way into my estate, I need you to know something. I knew you would do this." The video revealed everything. Daniel was aware of the betrayal, the lies, and the phony will. He had anticipated it all. With a knowing, icy smirk, he declared, "I set a trap." And that was only the start. Though it wasn't enough. The video was like a lifeline. Yes, we now had the evidence. But the conflict had not ended. By no means had the conflict ended. Margaret wasn't the kind to back down over a video. And David, well, I still couldn't believe he had taken her side. I had been friends with him. He had been like kin. I experienced a moment of relief after watching the video. Daniel had planned ahead, knowing that Margaret may attempt something similar. He had considered every possibility. However, she was not going to let it deter her. I was familiar enough with her to know that. She was determined to keep what she felt was hers. The days that followed were filled with court cases. My lawyer and I devoted numerous hours to gathering evidence, preparing for court, and going through documents. However, Margaret fought tirelessly at every stage. She utilized every tactic available to strengthen her case, such as bribing witnesses and manipulating statements. It was annoying, even enraging. On certain days, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to continue, but I was unable to stop. I have to get this done. For myself, for Daniel, and for everything we had created together. Even after the betrayal, David continued to loom in the distance. He would occasionally phone me or show up at the legal office and say he didn't want to be involved in the issue. However, I was able to discern his true intentions. I could always see the shame in his eyes when I looked at him. He had allowed himself to become entangled in Margaret's manipulation. Even though he knew it was wrong, I decided I needed a break one evening after a particularly demanding day. I needed some time to collect my thoughts and remind myself of my motivations. I took a walk outside to clear my head and enjoy the refreshing night air. My thoughts kept returning to the video and Daniel's parting remarks as I strolled through the silent streets. He appeared to be conversing with me and guiding me through the turbulent times. He had stated, "I set a trap, and now it was time to activate it." The more I considered it, the more I understood that Margaret had become blinded by her need. Her obsession with winning blinded her to the impending trap. She was unaware of all Daniel had set up. She had no idea how far he had gone to prevent her victory. I had to be careful with my hand. I awoke the following morning feeling purposeful. I informed my lawyer over the phone that we were going to adopt a different strategy. Time to step up the aggression. I had to ensure that the court was aware of Margaret's true abilities. I had a strategy, but it was risky. I would expose everything, including David's involvement and all of the evidence and lies. I was no longer going to battle solely for the estate. Justice was what I was going to fight for. However, even as I prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was taking place in the background. Margaret had consistently demonstrated her intelligence and foresight. Although I couldn't fully understand her actions, I suspected she could be manipulating her own situation. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. David sent it. He said, "Meet me," in a quiet voice. "I need to talk to you." I didn't know how to interpret it. I had avoided him for weeks, not even acknowledging his existence. But I hesitated because of something in his voice. There was desperation, perhaps guilt. Despite my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. We decided to meet in a little cafe outside of town. Although it wasn't a location I would have picked, it was peaceful and isolated. When I arrived, David was sitting at a table near the back, his hands tightly gripping a coffee cup. He appeared odd, as if he hadn't slept for days. A sense of remorse and tiredness replaced his normally assured manner. I crossed my arms and sat down opposite him, expecting him to say anything. He began, I know what I did was wrong." Without meeting my gaze, I should have never gotten involved with Margaret. I was weak, and I let her manipulate me. Skeptical, I raised an eyebrow. "You let her manipulate you? David, you were a grown man. You didn't have to help her." He grimaced as he nodded. "I know, I messed up, but there's something you need to know. Margaret, she's been planning this for years. This wasn't about money, it was about power, and she was using me to get what she wanted. I was interested in that." "What do you mean? How long has she been planning this?" He looked up at me and said, "Since Daniel was diagnosed," with regret in his eyes. "She knew she couldn't get the estate while Daniel was alive. So she waited. She manipulated me, telling me that if I helped her, I could finally get what I deserved. I believed her. I believed that I would also benefit from the situation. But now I see that I was just another pawn in her game." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "So you knew about all of this? You knew she was planning to lie about the will?" Slowly, he nodded. "Yes. But I didn't know how far she would go. I thought I was helping her. But now I realize she's only ever looked out for herself. She doesn't care about you or Daniel. She only cares about power." As I took in all he was telling me, I was silent for a while. Its burden was too much. Feelings of rage, betrayal, and something else were all over me. Relief, perhaps. I knew I wasn't crazy now. At least, it wasn't my imagination. All along, Margaret had been planning. I spoke firmly as I leaned forward. "David, I need your help. I require your honesty. I need you to testify about what you know. If you do this, we can stop her." David's expression twisted in agony. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes to stop her." I suddenly realized that I could potentially win this battle. It would not be simple. There would be more suffering and sacrifices involved. However, I had proof. I had Daniel's last words to guide me. And I had David on my side. Furthermore, I wouldn't allow Margaret to get away with ruining everything. They set up the trap. The moment had come to spring it. Following my meeting with David, the days seemed to be a never-ending sprint against the clock. We needed to act fast since Margaret had previously demonstrated her brutality. And I didn't want to give her another chance to elude me. Now that David was on my side, I believed I had a chance. But the war was far from over. I would have to use all of my strength to defeat her. They mobilized the legal team. We planned for the next court dates, filed motions, and provided proof. I felt we had a genuine chance to win this as soon as I found out David was willing to testify. His testimony would be the decisive factor for Margaret. There was no way she could get out of this by lying. However, I was also aware that she would fight to the end. We so braced ourselves for her reprisal. As usual, Margaret was not amused by the news of David's betrayal. She started by attempting to disparage him. She began distributing false information in an attempt to portray him as a liar. A man who had been duped by me. And someone who was desperate to avoid taking responsibility for his own actions. She used extraneous information, old family feuds, and anything else she could to cast him in a negative light. However, I was aware of the reality. In her story, David wasn't a bad guy. Although he was not flawless. He had taken a decision and was prepared to accept responsibility for his errors. His willingness to testify demonstrated this. His attempt to rehabilitate himself was the driving force behind his metamorphosis. Not merely the wealth or the land. The man I was currently seeing had experienced the consequences of doing the right thing firsthand. Margaret attempted to portray everything as a family quarrel. She tried to give the impression that I was attacking her for money. She attempted to portray herself as the victim by creating a barrier of deflection and swaying public opinion. However, I refused to fall for it. After all, we had the evidence. The video was with us. David gave his testimony to us. Above all else, we had the truth. The estate was no longer the source of our arguments. For the man who had been duped. For the family that had been split apart. And for everything that had been destroyed as a result of Margaret's ambition. We were fighting for justice. I would arrive at the office every morning ready for any fresh assault Margaret would launch on us. However, as the days passed, something changed. Margaret appeared more unstable and frantic. I could see the panic in her eyes. And her once steely manner was starting to crumble. She was aware that she was losing control. Even though it was subtle. She was aware that the walls were getting closer. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer with unexpected news. He said, "We've got an offer," in a calm but slightly surprised tone. "Margaret wants to settle." What I was hearing was unbelievable. Settle? After everything she's done, she's offering a settlement? He gave a dry laugh. It's not just a settlement. She's willing to give up the estate entirely. She's even willing to give up her claim to the will. As long as you drop the charges against her. Confusion swept over me, and I asked myself, why would she do that? What's her angle? She's in damage control mode. He had answered, she knows she's losing. If she keeps going, she risks everything. She's trying to save face. But she's desperate. I took a seat back and allowed the offer to sink in. On the one hand, I had been waiting for this opportunity. I would be able to move on from all of this and own the estate. Without being pulled through the muck all the time. I could be at peace and pay tribute to Daniel's memory. However, there was something strange about the way she was presenting it. It was too simple, too tidy. Margaret was not a woman who surrendered easily. She was unable to accept defeat. I wasn't going to make the mistake of putting my trust in her again since something wasn't right. I instructed my attorney to inform her that I had no intention of reaching a settlement. We were going to complete the task at hand. I refused to let her get away with it. Later, I understood that choice as the pivotal moment. The estate was no longer the exclusive focus. It has nothing to do with the court case. I wanted to let her know that I didn't fear her. I wanted her to know that I wouldn't allow her to control me in the same way she had David. Margaret had misjudged me. She had assumed that I was weak and would give way under the strain. However, she was mistaken. We went to court on the matter. It was harsh, each day was more taxing than the one before. The back and forth between attorneys, the testimony, and the legal fighting seemed to go on forever. Now, however, I was in it through to the very finish. I had lost everything. Then the time I had been anticipating arrived. David stood up. I was convinced that he was going to strike the last blow. He spoke clearly and sharply. He was unafraid to speak the truth. He talked about everything, including the lies, the manipulation, and how Margaret had taken advantage of him. He even mentioned how she had attempted to coerce him into betraying me by promising him a portion of the estate in exchange for his assistance in bringing me down. Margaret sat across the courtroom, her face contorted in rage. She did not, however, move. She remained silent. David's testimony was akin to a bomb detonating in the middle of the courtroom. It shattered whatever illusion Margaret had created. There was nothing left for her. The weight of the truth had caused the deception, manipulation, and lies she had been spreading for months to fall apart. The judge wasted no time in making a decision. The judge made the decision quickly. I owned the estate. David's involvement in Margaret's plot revealed her actions to be deliberate and malevolent, clearing her of all charges. She had no more space to conceal herself. However, I didn't feel the thrill of success I had anticipated as I exited the courtroom. It wasn't sweet. It was insubstantial. The damage had already occurred. Daniel was no longer part of my family. After that, there was no turning back. I knew I had won as I stood there in the chilly, glaring afternoon light. However, the price was higher than I ever imagined. The days after the trial passed quickly. Despite my relief at reclaiming what was rightfully mine, the court's decision weighed heavily on me, making me feel defeated. The victory did not bring back the family I lost. The peace I had longed for was not restored. I slept by myself in the house, wandering about the deserted rooms and listening to the sounds of the past. The walls, once filled with warmth, laughter, and love, now felt empty. The estate and the inheritance were nothing more than possessions. Even though we had fought for it, the true loss was far more significant, so it ultimately meant nothing. Daniel was on my mind constantly. I was constantly thinking about the sibling I lost and how much I wanted him to be present for this occasion. None of this would have pleased him. Being caught in the crossfire of our family's betrayal and avarice would never have pleased him. But I was powerless to alter the past. Now I had no choice except to accept the consequences. Following the trial, David made an effort to get in touch with me. He called and left messages. He once more expressed regret for his involvement in everything, for playing Margaret's game, and for not supporting me sooner. He even volunteered to try to mend the family's broken pieces and assist me in moving on. I was unsure of how to react to him. A part of me yearned for forgiveness, acknowledging that he had become twisted and a victim just like me. The other side of me, however, was still resentful of the years that had gone by. No amount of apologies could fix his failure when I needed him. In actuality, I had given up on trying to make everything better. I didn't want to continue acting as though I could put the parts back together because I couldn't. I stepped away from the company. I made it plain that I no longer had any interest in managing the family business or the estate. And it was all left to competent hands. I was unable to, not after all that had transpired. I moved into a smaller apartment after packing up my belongings and leaving the house that was associated with too many memories. It was a small place, but it felt like home. And it was quiet. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a long time. However, I quickly discovered that peace was a delicate concept. It was short-lived. A few months after the trial, I received a call one evening. Jake was the one. He had an odd, tight voice, as if he were holding something back. He said, "Hey, man," following a few awkward silences. "I need to talk to you. It's about Margaret." I scowled, instantly aware. What about her? He paused for a long moment before continuing. She's been trying to contact you. She has been attempting to reach out to you through various channels, including friends and lawyers. She wants to make amends. She is requesting a second chance and asserts that she has learned from everything that occurred. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Was Margaret now attempting to portray herself as the repentant sinner in light of everything she had done and the suffering she had caused? There was no humor. But I laughed sourly. She's trying to get back into my favorable graces? After all of this? Jake was silent for a while. She claims to have undergone a transformation. She says she wants to fix things. But I don't know. Man, I thought you should know. I inhaled deeply and exhaled gradually. A part of me wished I could just end the call. Remove her from my life. And stop thinking about her ever again. A part of me, though, questioned what her game was. What was her true desire? In my heart, I knew I wasn't prepared to forgive her. That I most likely wouldn't be. However, I was also aware that I had to make the choice to permanently remove her from my life. I was determined not to allow her to influence me in any way again. When I eventually said, I appreciate you letting me know, Jake, but this is something I need to handle on my own. I was left wondering if I had made the proper decision in the silence of my flat when the talk ended. I was aware of my departure from the past. Yet I remained uncertain about what lay ahead. No more battling for something that had already been lost. No more chasing shadows. The conflict was over. I had the estate. But at what price? I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that I no longer even recognized after the relationships and family were destroyed. However, that might have been acceptable. Moving forward might be the best course of action for me at this point. I looked around the flat one last time. For the first time in a long time. I recognized that perhaps peace came from learning to live with the fractures rather than trying to heal what was broken. It was peaceful here. Before, I wasn't who I was. I wasn't the one who stood up for the inheritance or the family. Now I was something else. Maybe something more powerful, but more careful. And I thought I might be all right for the first time in a long time.